my name is Ben. Several years ago, my wife Kelly and I began a journey towards adoption. We went through the process of being certified as a foster family here in Texas, and then that later turned into adoption. But it was a challenging time in our life because the demands upon us through that foster to adopt journey were very intense. And it was a time in our life when we realized that we just kind of like exceeded our bandwidth maximum, like at all levels, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, all these ways. And it was a time in our life where, as a pastor, I'd spent all these years trying to mobilize people to mission and see what can I do to support people to follow the call of God in their life, to live on mission. And it was a time in our lives where we got to live on mission, and then the spiritual community came around us to help us. And so in just like practical ways, they brought meals to the house, they helped watch our kids. We just felt really supported, by the body of Christ as we pursued what God had called us to do on this journey in adoption. And through that, we just learned afresh and anew just the value of community in our own lives as we're seeking to build community for others in their lives.
What do you think of when you hear the word worship? Perhaps you think, well, you have to go to the church. There has to be a ritual. There has to be certain songs and certain prayers. Songs and prayers are great, and church services are important. But you can do all that, and it doesn't mean you're worshiping, because worship is more than attending a service or saying words. Worship is a lifestyle. So many times we get caught up in a style of music or preaching, and we forget that our weekend worship experience is just a small part of what worship is. When we get together to worship God on the weekend, that should be just one moment of a whole week of worshiping God through what we say and through what we think and through what we do. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 22, 34 through 40. Here's what it says. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. Jesus is saying that true worship of God, the true way to honor and glorify God with your life, is to devote your life to loving Him with all that you are, loving Him with your heart, which might mean putting His commands before your own desires, loving Him with your soul, meaning loving Him out of the depths of who you are with your choices and with your obedience to Him, loving Him with your mind, which could mean studying and memorizing the Bible. All of these are forms of worship. When we're doing these things each day, we're more connected to God. We're growing to become more like Him. And as a bonus, we're also going to get a lot more out of the official worship services at church. The Jewish people that Jesus was speaking to at the time had their own rituals and customs for worship. And many of them were things God had instituted, like making sacrifices in the temple. Those were good things and practices that certainly honored God. But in Romans 12, Paul expands the idea of worship as a lifestyle that goes beyond our religious services. He writes, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Paul is saying that true worship is not offering sacrifices at an altar, but in fact, sacrificing our own lives for God's purposes, to be living sacrifices that point to God in every moment. When we do this, we show God to others and we're transformed to be more like Him. True worship is loving God and loving others. It's praising, glorifying, and honoring God in everything we do. And it's available to all of us, no matter what kind of music we like or what denomination we belong to. Today in your groups, consider how you can worship God with your heart, your soul, and your mind. How can you help each other grow in a lifestyle of worship?